You're listening to Marcus Gill Presents Antarctica Expert Interviews. Get the most out of your Antarctica adventure by learning practical how-to knowledge and listening to the fascinating stories shared by the world's leading experts on your Antarctica itinerary. And be sure to read the video description for more information on how to prepare for your own Antarctica cruise. Now, here's Marcus.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Antarctica Expert Interviews. This is a really special episode. Our guest is Aggens of Polar Explorers. Annie is just such a giving and kind person. She's very humble. You would never guess that she is one of the most renowned experts in the field of taking clients on expeditions to the edge of the Earth. She takes people to the South Pole on long-term camping and skiing expeditions. So this is for someone, if you're interested in spending more time on the Antarctic continent and camping. This is not going to be a frills and cappuccino and martini type experience. This is for someone who wants to go in-depth, deep into the world of Antarctica. I have no doubt that Annie will provide an excellent experience for you. Chris Templeton is our producer and host, and they discuss everything from NASA level training, just basic fundamental principles that the astronauts use that transfer over to individuals traveling to Antarctica, the type of equipment that you'll need, the clothing, but more importantly, the mindset. She gets into a little bit of the philosophy. She's just a really fascinating person, regardless of the type of travel you plan to go on. I would highly recommend taking her advice and even reaching out to her, especially if you want to enjoy a camping and skiing expedition. All right, so I'll let you get to it. There's a lot to unpack here. This is Annie Aggens speaking with Chris Templeton about Annie's Polar Explorers expeditions to the South Pole.
Now, here is your host, Chris Templeton.
I'm really pleased to be here with Annie Aggens from Polar Explorers. Annie, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and talk to people about something that is really, really, in my mind, one of the most special things you could probably do on the planet.
Well, thanks so much. I'm excited to talk with you.
So tell everybody a little bit about your background. How'd you get into this?
I started doing wilderness camping programs with my family and with organizations when I was young, and I just kept doing it, and the trips kept getting a little longer, 2 days, 3 days, 5, 10, 20, 40, 50, to different parts of mostly North America, including all the way up to the subarctic. And it was amazing. And the more time I spent in the wilderness, I knew that this was a place, wherever it was, that was super important, both to myself, but also to the world at large. And I met incredible people. I learned so much about myself and so much about other people and had a blast. And I was really fortunate to find a way to incorporate that into my life.
So you really haven't talked about how you got to actually Arctic expeditions. How did that come about?
So when I was in my teens and in my early 20s, I did a lot of expeditions to the subarctic, so just below the Arctic Circle. And as I was doing those, I fell in love with the tundra and with the history and with the people in the communities where we would end our expeditions. And I was very fortunate to end up working for a company called the Northwest Passage outside of Chicago. And the Northwest Passage had a very unique history in and of itself because they organized and guided the first dog sled and ski expedition to the North Pole for amateur adventurers. So outside of professional adventures, outside of historic adventures. And I started working with them. And eventually we decided that the polar portion of that company was so unique and so different from any other kind of adventuring that it really needed its own everything. It's, a dedicated website, dedicated people. And so we created Polar Explorers. They're really sister companies. And I first went to the North Pole in 2000. It was an amazing experience. I found it to be so similar to what I had expected and so different in so many ways. And then we also do Antarctica, and it was a real treat to go down to Antarctica. And most people think, okay, we've got two poles, they should be really similar. And they're so different from each other in amazing ways. And they do have some similarities, but more differences. So that's how I got into polar travel. And I love it for a lot of reasons, but one is because it's unlike anything else. You know, if you're got a vacation to Greece or a vacation to some other destination, it really is that. It's, you're hoping for really good weather. You're hoping for some spots that are cool, maybe a nice warm beach where you can lay down and relax. But on expeditions to the polar regions, it's really at a whole nother level, and you're sort of not expecting good weather. You sort of are knowing that being uncomfortable, working hard, having really challenging days, that's what you're going for. That's what you can expect. And that mentality that's required to be successful in those environments and to find pleasure in them and joy and how you can thrive and not just survive, that's really important, and it's also really enjoyable for myself and all of the guides that I work with.
Talk about that a little bit more, though. It's such a juxtaposition between I'm going to Greece and I want to lay by the pool and enjoy the views, to really being in a place where I know that what I'm about to experience is something I've probably never experienced before. So talk a little bit about how you get to this place of joy in such a challenging environment.
So we really talk about these expeditions with people who are joining us in a couple different ways. One way is to think about it as much more than just one experience. We sort of break down an expedition into phases. The first phase would be the preparatory phase, and it really starts when you say, okay, I'm committed. I think I'm going to do this expedition. And that is learning all about it, learning about how you can prepare yourself to succeed. It's learning about all of your clothing and your equipment, getting some new skills, thinking about how you're going to prepare your life back home so that you can leave and everything's going to be taken care of to your satisfaction. That allows you, when you're on the expedition, to really be there and be mindful and not be worrying about things that are going on back home. And that's super important. The second phase would be the expeditionary phase, and that's when all your preparations come to fruition. That's when you take the first ski steps north or south, and everything that you've been working for, you're nervous, you're excited, it all begins. And that sort of incorporates a whole mentality of living. It's all about, we call it the expedition mentality, and that's a mentality about being present, about being adaptable, about caring for your equipment and yourself and the people that you are with in positive ways. So it's a lot about learning and about allowing yourself to help others when you can, and also allowing yourself to be helped by others when that's necessary. And so there's a whole lot on the expeditionary phase that's important. And then the last phase we call the growth phase. And what that is it's really saying, wow, I just had an amazing experience. It's wrapping up now, or it's finished. I'm on my way back home. And you have all sorts of emotions. And some of those can be surprising. They might feel a little sad and empty because you've been working so hard every day, taking hours just to melt the water that you're going to be drinking, and doing so much. And then everything when you're back at home becomes so easy. And so there's a lot of kind of getting back into the rhythm of normal life. But there's so much opportunity for growth and for sharing your experience with all sorts of people, your family, your community, friends, and others. So there's all these different phases of an expedition. And the cool thing about these types of expeditions is they mean different things to you wherever you are in your life, however old you are. And so even years down the line, an expedition to an amazing place, not just the polar regions, but for us, the polar regions, they can still keep showing their benefits. They can still keep giving back to you no matter where and when it is in your life.
That is a lot, and I really appreciate your clarity on each of those pieces, the preparation, the expedition, and the growth. Let's go through all three of those, but let's start with preparation, because I think that one of the things that I imagine you as a guide really needs to help people to understand what they're going through and how to be ready for it. Talk a little bit about that.
Right? That's so true. It helps us that a lot of people who join our expeditions have done adventures before. And they oftentimes are not anything like this one, but it might have been camping with friends or family. It might have been personal expeditions. I use that word a lot, but personal adventures places. And it's really important for people to know that they can start to look back and listen to their bodies and listen to what brought them joy. How did their bodies feel when they were in these places? As simple as, did you get hot easily? Did you sweat a lot? How do you know when you're tired? You know, what sort of signs does your body give you when you're beginning to need more food, need more drink? Know that you need to shut down for a while. You know, those things are all important, and our bodies are excellent teachers, but a lot of times we aren't listening. So one of the things we teach people is, hey, let's talk about your past and what you've done before, and let's try to draw some of those answers out. And as you train for this expedition, one of the important things is beginning to listen to your body and looking for the clues that it's giving to you. We also like to talk to people about training for these expeditions in environments that are not always ideal. So I'm outside of Chicago. I might go train when it's raining out. Normally I wouldn't do that. But what happens when this trickle of water keeps going down my eye and I just have to take my hands off my ski poles even though I'm pulling a tire and it's not even cold out, and I have to go like this? You know, we call that training outside of the box, for training for having to keep going when things are not ideal. Maybe you didn't get as much sleep as you had hoped. Maybe you've got something on your mind, or maybe the rain's dribbling down or the wind's buffeting you on a side of your face. You know, NASA also trains their astronauts for things like this. I think they call it external training, but it's for training for living in an environment that you're not used to. And it's really important because, you know, what breaks the camel's back? It's usually a small thing like having a song stuck in your head that you just can't get out. Or it might be, you know, having to tie that shoelace that keeps seeming to come undone every hour, and then you've got to stop, you've got to put your ski poles down, go down, tie the shoelace, redo it. You know, those things tend to be harder when you're in an environment where you're putting almost all of your energy into just putting one foot in front of the next. So learning to deal with those, learning how to listen to yourself and give yourself pep talks, but also say, okay, we've got to figure out how to deal with these little frustrations in a different way so that when they happen, we're able to kind of move through them easier. But a lot of times we are also working with people primarily about how to deal with their thermoregulation. So it's a cold place, right? Antarctica, especially when you're down near the South Pole. And being in the cold environment is for sure the hardest thing. You know, pulling a sled is very hard. Yes, it is. But you're outside in the cold 24 hours a day. And you are having to learn how to deal with that, how to eat enough food, how to constantly be taking things off and putting them on, or adjusting, unzipping here, zipping up there, moving your goggles, so that the environment around you, you have some control over how it's affecting you. We really don't have any control about the environment, but with practice, you can learn how to adjust to it. And that's really important. Keeping yourself well energized and at the right temperature, which is constantly fluctuating, is one of the hardest things that we have to do when we're on these expeditions.
Once you know how to do it, though, I imagine that it becomes almost second nature. But learning that, and I imagine that's the case for a lot of the skills that you have to learn, is that, and the preparation phase of this type of journey is all about new experiences and normalizing them. Is that right?
It is. It is very much about that. Does it become second nature? Yes and no. Yes, you begin to learn that you are always having to adjust. It might be that it's nicer than you thought it would be. The wind isn't there. And so all of a sudden you're needing to adjust your zippers, and you're really hoping that you don't need to adjust a inner layer, but you might. But the important thing to remember is that your body is just not a set it and forget it piece of an equipment. You know, if you are just, all you're doing is you're skiing for 5 miles and it's like this, and then all of a sudden it starts going like this and you're going uphill just a little bit, well, that might affect both your energy level as well as your internal thermometer. Or if the wind picks up and it's now coming a little harder, you know, all of these things they're all moving, and you need to move with them. And so as long as you know, like, okay, here, I'm adjusted, I'm good now. What's going to happen if this happens? How am I going to adjust to that? And where is that piece of equipment so that I can get it without really having to stop and open up my sled? those are the things that you get really good at. And if you are good at them, and if you know that you might have a situation where you're still learning, which is always the case, then you're able to kind of release your mind and go and think about other things, which is really a joy when you're out there.
That's a great point. In so many ways, preparation is all about doing the things that you need to do so that you can actually focus on the beauty of what you're doing. Is that right?
Right. So true. So true. And we remind people oftentimes, like, hey, when we're a team out there and we're skiing together, we're usually in a line. Sometimes we're next to each other, but it helps to take advantage of somebody in front of you sort of breaking the path. And so it's really easy just to always look at the ski tips, the backs of the skis of the person in front of you, or the back of their sled, and just kind of ski along. And it's amazing that one of the most common reminders is, hey, everybody, every so often, look up. Look around. What you're going to see is a whole lot of white, and a lot of times a white sky too. And so it might look like a big white wall, but just look up, because every hour the colors change so subtly. The wind changes how much snow is lifted up into the air. And it's important to just, where you are at this moment in time will only look this way to you once. So that's a really remarkable thing, is to remember that, wow, I'm in this amazing place. I'm just going to look up and take it in, and then I'll go back down to putting one foot in front of the next.
In terms of preparation, I imagine another huge piece of this, I know it is equipment. Talk about kind of the requirements equipment-wise that people need to be thinking about when they take on something like this.
Great question. And you're absolutely right. Equipment's really important. Personal clothing, it's important to have the right stuff, but it's also important to know how it works with your body. So what I use to keep myself warm is different what some of my colleagues use to keep themselves warm, because we all have different sweat thresholds, and we all have different thresholds about how much we need to be moving to keep ourselves warm and what the wind does to us. But the items that I think have some of the greatest we get a lot of questions about in our the most important are the wind layers. So a wind layer it doesn't have any insulation really. It's just protecting your body from the wind, upper layer and bottom layer. And another thing about that's kind of incorporated into your outer layers is that everything in the polar regions is really oversized and meant to be roomy, because air is the best insulation. And so if, like a mountaineer, you're wearing all tight clothing because it's helpful, you're wearing a harness on and everything else like that. We wear clothes that are longer, baggier. There's more room for space between the layers. Our base layers are tight against our body usually, but everything else just has a little bit more room. And so a lot of the times we are telling people for your outer layers, to look for something that's normally a size larger than it would normally be. And also, if you need to, would allow you to wear more underneath of it. The other thing that people usually have to get, because it's pretty specific to the polar regions, is mitts for their hands. Over mitts, so we use a system called a mitt system. We usually have gloves on that you're wearing almost 24 hours a day, not while you sleep, but all times during the day. If you pull your hand out of your mitt, you're usually wearing a glove on that. What that glove is made out of really depends on your hand's ability to keep itself warm. How good is your circulation? Some gloves prevent two fingers from being able to warm each other because they've got not neoprene, but a little, wind resistance fabric, stuff like that. For some people, that's okay. For other people, they need much thinner and much lighter, just so that their fingers can warm each other. And then inside of that, your hands will go inside of a mitt that is usually made out of either wool or it's made out of a synthetic. And then that goes inside of another layer, which is a wind resistant layer, protecting your hands from the wind. And sometimes we have devices that are built onto our ski poles, and our hands will go inside of that. So a lot of those things are really kind of dependent on how your hands work. They're also dependent on how you like them. We have to like what we're wearing. It has to be comfortable for us, which means that what I wear and what you wear might be slightly different, but there's not too many good mitt systems out there. So we can usually point people in the right direction. And then it's just a matter of getting used to them, making sure they've got a size that fits right. If they pull their hands out of it, how can they make sure that those gloves don't fly away in the wind? Mine has a leash system that goes over my neck and ties around my back if I'm not using them, things like that. But wearing your clothing, one of the most important things about clothing is to get familiar, as I say, with how it works for you. So wearing it while you're training, wearing your gloves, even taking your gloves inside, the whole mitt system, going inside your house and trying to make yourself a cup of tea. Get a plate out of the cupboard. Just learning how to do this, how to unwrap things with your gloves on, how to set up your tent with your mitts on. Those are things that if you don't think about them in advance, you get out there and you're like, oh my gosh, what? I can't do this? I wish I had thought about that before. And then you practice and it gets easier.
And then I imagine the other thing that you need is really intense footwear.
Yeah, we have boots that are generally in the range of around minus 95 degrees Fahrenheit. There are a couple different models that we recommend. Again, there are only about 3 or 4 different models that are probably warm enough and durable enough for these expeditions. But you're absolutely right, which boot you have and then what kind of a liner you put inside of it. Because some people decide, the liner that came with the boot, I like it, but I've got this other pair of boots that I've also worn on expeditions, and I'm just going to borrow the liner from that one and put it in this one, and let's see how that works. And so knowing your gear, knowing your footwear, where it tends to rub you if it does. And these are, again, they've got more air. They're not as tight as mountain climbing boots, as an example. They're a little bit more like moon boots, if you can remember back in the day. They just have more foam air cushioning in them, which helps to keep your foot much warmer. But there are various things that you can do to help your feet. And of course, keeping your feet healthy is something that takes time. And it's something that we encourage people to think about on a daily basis. Giving yourself an extra 15 minutes at night or in the morning as necessary to just take care of your feet, dry them out. If you have any hot spots, taking care of those, and also just kind of treating them with a little bit of respect.
One of the things that you mentioned was in preparation, dragging a tire. Why in the world would I want to drag a tire?
Yeah, well, you should try it sometime and see what your neighbors think of you. Dragging a tire is very similar to dragging a sled. You can imagine if you're going on an expedition to the South Pole and you're pulling a sled with all of your kit inside, that it can weigh a lot. And it's very helpful to have those muscles and also the muscle memory ready to go when you touch down at your starting point and you start walking to the South Pole. And for most of us, we don't have snow year round, or you may never have snow. And so pulling a tire just allows you to simulate pulling a sled in advance of your expedition. And one of the best parts about that, as I said, is that your muscles, it's not the only thing you should do to train, but it's I think one of the most important, because when you get out there on those first steps south, your body immediately remembers and says, okay, all right, brain, I've done this. So you're allowed to think about other things like how, if you're getting too hot or if you need to, put some sunscreen on your lips, things like that, because your body remembers, okay, this is the same pace I was going at before, and this feels exactly what it felt like at home, and we're all good there.
One of the things that you mentioned was a kit. You're dragging your kit. Tell everybody what's in a kit and the types of things that they need to be thinking about in terms of a kit that really is going to work for them in the Antarctic or polar regions.
So, of course, there's your personal kit. That's your clothing that you're wearing or not wearing while you're on the go. When we're, in addition to that, you have your personal gear, then you have the group gear. And that would be the tents, the cooking equipment, the stoves, the food, the fuel. And then there's other equipment. There's some communication equipment, repair equipment, first aid kit, things like this, some shovels, some various things like that. And those get divided up between the group members. So your personal kit and then your portion of the rest of the group kit. As far as kit goes, it can weigh different amounts depending on how long your expedition is. And if it is a long expedition, then it depends on whether you have any resupplies or not. One of the benefits is that as you go, of course, you're eating your food and you're using your fuel, so your sled tends to get a little lighter. At the South Pole, as you approach the South Pole, the last couple of degrees, maybe the last degree, you are required to carry out your poop. So that there you do have an accumulation of weight that doesn't go away. I mean, you might be eating the food, but you're also putting some of it back in that way. That's a common thing in not just Antarctica, but in other places where the environment's very sensitive and people are using specific routes where they might, I might be following you, you're going at a certain time, I might be going a little bit later. But using roughly the same route. And the reason why we might be doing that in Antarctica is because at the South Pole, there's a station and there's a lot of research going on. And some of that research is outside the station. So we have a couple of areas where we need to access the South Pole so that we're not disrupting any science. So we sort of get Antarctica, and even the last few degrees at the South Pole it's huge, right? But at the very end, we might get funneled to a certain spot so that we're all entering and leaving the scientific research undisturbed. But in other places, you also have to remove your human waste by carrying it out with you. And that's a good thing because that leaves less of a certain kind of an impact. Other things about your kit is knowing how to use the equipment that you're bringing. So for instance, knowing how to use your stove, knowing how to repair it, knowing how to use your tents, how they might break, how you can prevent them. I say break, but it's more, a zipper gets snagged or something like that. But understanding each piece of your gear, how to use it correctly and what to keep your eye out for. And then if something does happen, making sure that you're able to repair that when you're in the field. That's always important. So for anybody joining an expedition, that's something that we, the guides, of course, know how to do, and we prepare the first aid kits, we prepare the repair kits, everything like that. But when you're out there and when you're removed from the rest of the world, it really is a group effort to reach both your group goals, but also your individual goals. And knowing how to understand and take care of every piece of equipment that's out there is really important.
Talk a little bit about some of the thing that really occurs to me is in terms of preparation. We'll wrap up preparation with this is, and you've said it a number of times, it's not your standard clothing. It's not your standard gloves. Talk about some of the brands that you recommend for clothing, for shoes, for gloves, that sort of thing.
Sure. So there's a few brands that we often use. For our outer layer, for our anoraks, we use a brand called Wintergreen Northern Wear in northern Minnesota. They just have been working with expeditions in the polar regions for a long time. So they create an anorak wind jacket that is very similar to Inuit design that goes back a long time. We use a lot of gear that's made by Mountain Hardwear. We use gear that is made by Rob. We use gear that is made by, let's see here. I think I'm going to have to maybe in terms of the actual gear companies, I might have to write those down to make sure I'm hitting all of them. But, you can find companies that focus on expedition equipment. And a lot of times that expedition equipment is high altitude mountaineering because a lot more people do high altitude mountaineering than do the polar regions. But high altitude mountaineering also experiences a lot of very cold weather and is also concerned about weight. Those are things that we think about a lot too. And in Antarctica, you have actually a lot of the same conditions that you might in the high mountains. You have cold, dry air and a lot of wind. And that can happen in a lot of the mountains. So using down, for instance, in Antarctica is okay. It's light, it's warm, and if you know how to care for it, it's great. In other areas of both poles, North and South Pole, you go into conditions where there's a lot more humidity, where you might not consider using down. But in Antarctica, down is wonderful. And a lot of times, those companies that make high altitude mountaineering gear also have good stuff for your hands and other parts of your body. Hands in particular in the polar region, we like mitt systems that are modular, so you can use any one part of that mitt system at a time. And it's not like, okay, here's your really thick, heavy down mitt. This is your mitt system, and you can put your hands are going to be warm. We want to know that, if I'm working on a stove, I'm outside for some reason, or if I'm putting up my tent, I might just be in my mitts. But then I might need my wind layer just over my gloves without the inner mittens. Or I might have my mittens on, but I get hot and they sweat, and I need to pull them out to dry them out. I need all three sections of my mitt system to be drying out inside the tent, and then I put them back together. So a modular system for the hands is really great, and that actually often doesn't come available to mountaineers. They're more kind of the bigger mitts that are just one unit. Other gear that is important to find that is a good fit for you is the boots, is the outer layer pants. And there are a lot of good manufacturers for those. Arc'teryx is one that makes a lot of outer shells. Some people wear soft shells. Again, having them be slightly larger than what you would wear if you were at home allows you to put a pair of long underwear underneath, but it also allows you a lot of movement, and it increases the warmth. But pockets are really important. Having the pockets where you want them so that they're easy to use, and whether or not they have zippers. I like zippers because I'm doing a lot of bending over and getting up, but I like to have a pocket on an inner layer that's right here, and I will keep some batteries in there for my GPS so that they're warm if and when I need them. And then I have pockets on my thighs that I really like. I like them on my thighs because they're below the harness I wear to pull my sled. And I can put in there certain things like maybe a stick of lip balm. My lips are often covered, but if they're not, I want to keep those protected, and other things that I might use on a regular basis. One other thing that we haven't talked about much, but is really important, is how we eat when we're moving during the day. And we take snack breaks about every hour, maybe hour 15 minutes. And we eat food that is high in calories, relatively easy to digest, and will really energize our body. So again, what I eat and what you eat might be different. And we're going to make 5 or 6 stops during the day. And it's important to have something so that you're excited to eat. If you just bring your favorite energy bar and you have that over and over and over and over again for many days, you're going to get to the point where it's hard to swallow it because you're just so tired of it. So having food that won't freeze and break your teeth, but is also very much you're looking forward to it. And that it'll energize you. So I bring some of my favorite bars. I bring Snicker bars, which I have to wear to keep them from freezing. I bring Luna bars. I bring a Gorp mix, which I put in a wide mouth Nalgene bottle. So I just open it up and pour it in my mouth and close it. I bring sometimes crackers, sometimes cheese sticks, which I also have to wear in my pockets. I will bring dried fruit. I sometimes have soups that I prepare in the morning and have them during my first break when they're still hot. Sometimes I bring Pringles, which is really just kind of satisfying for the crunch, not necessarily so nutritious, but they do provide me energy for a little while. So thinking about that, and if you're on a trip that's 10 days, it's not so hard, but if you're on a trip that's 20 or 30 days, you have to actually give that a lot of thought and practice it out quite a bit.
The last thing in terms of preparation, physically, what do I need to do to get ready to do a 20-day expedition? What are the types of things that I might not think about that you would recommend?
Great question. So most people think about cardiovascular endurance. That's one of the first things they think about because they know they're going to be pulling a sled, and they know that they're going to be breathing heavy in and out all day long. Absolutely, they're right. You have to come with a good cardiovascular endurance. Other things that are less frequently thought about are things like balance Because if you're skiing in a whiteout, it's white up here, it's white down here, it's just white, and you have nothing to look at. And so a lot of times, even if you're on a hill that's only 10 inches high, you don't know that it's only 10 inches high, and it might be 5 feet high or 50 feet high, and you don't know as if you're going uphill or if you're tilting to the side, and your balance can get off sometimes. So sometimes you're just kind of skiing into the white, hoping that you're not going downhill or uphill, which you're usually not. But your knees and your arms and your all those fine balance muscles are in high alert. So those days are pretty exhausting. So just getting used to your balance is actually really helpful, because on difficult days like that, it does allow you to ski with a little bit more ease and you're not so tense. Also, flexibility. People often don't remember how much getting up and getting down, crawling into your tent, bending down to work on your bindings, how much up and down there is. And so having some good flexibility is also really, really great. And if you're on an expedition of many days, it will help you endure that with a lot more pleasure. And then I also like to think about training for power and protection. So power is sort of what we talked about with endurance, but it's also about if you need to help somebody out and you've got a heavy sled all day, every day, but then you have a tent member who is not feeling well and you need to take a little bit of their weight. Being able to step it up a little bit, or maybe it's just that you're going as best you can, but there's a little hill and you need to make it to the top of the hill. Being able to up it a little bit. So knowing how when you're doing your training, you're going at a nice steady pace, but then for, 1 minute out of every 10, go harder and faster, and then go back down, and just see how that affects you, and allow yourself to be able to know that you can either step it up a notch or step it down a notch if you need to. And that stepping it down a notch is important too, because you might be the strongest person in a team, and it might be that you need to go a little bit slower, which might mean that you have to wear a little bit more, or offer to take some kit from somebody and add it to your sled so your sled's a little bit heavier. And then the last thing I like people to think about when they're training is protection. So we all have things going on in our bodies. I know I got Achilles tendons that need a lot of stretching. And sometimes my lower back also needs a little bit of extra care. But other people have knees or elbows or even wrists, things like this. We all know what our special parts of our body are that need extra attention. So when you're training, talk to somebody, talk to a physical therapist or a trainer, and prepare yourself for that. Know which stretches you can do in a tent that allow you to take care of those spots that are that need a little extra attention for you. And when you're preparing for the expedition, maybe focus on building up the muscles around those areas so that you are able to, for instance, shovel every day a little bit when you're setting up your tent, and you're going to be okay. Your body is now prepared for that.
The thing that you haven't mentioned directly, although it comes up in a variety of situations like being a team member, is the mental aspect of this. What do you do to prepare for, because I'm sure that you're never going to know until you're out there what it's really like, but what are the types of things that you can do to prepare mentally for this?
Oh, it's such a good question, and you're absolutely right. That's hard because for each of us, some of us are optimistic, some of us aren't. Some of us look at a tough situation and we tackle it like this, and other people get stressed out about it, So one of the things that we talk a lot about is when you show up for your expedition, that's not just showing up and you're arriving there with all your kit, but it's also showing up mentally and being ready as you can be to go with the flow. And I say that with a little hesitation because you always want to be, I should say, being prepared to adapt to changing circumstances, and giving what you can and staying as positive as you can, because things are always changing. This is the thing. We are not in control of a lot of what we do down there. A lot of it, most of it is dealing with the conditions that we are given. And that includes the conditions of our body and of other people's bodies, the conditions of the environment, the wind, the snow, how sticky it is, the terrain. And so again, I've mentioned this before, but having an expedition mentality, which means that you are prepared to do your best, to contribute as much as you can, to allow yourself to be helped out as necessary, to think of everybody in the team as members that need support, and to think about humor in a different way. You know, we all need humor in our lives, and so to allow yourself to laugh at yourself and at situations. But I have two children at school. They're in middle school right now, and their schools teach them about the growth mindset. It's about looking at failure academically and perhaps socially in a different way than like, oh, I just screwed that up. It's more like, okay, what can I learn from that situation? So the expedition mindset takes that very similarly and puts it in an expedition context, allowing you to, at the end of every day, say, okay, what can I do tomorrow that's going to make my life easier and more fun and more rewarding? And not looking at hard days as failures, because there will be hard days. And there will be times when you're not seeing eye to eye with somebody on the expedition, and really kind of looking at those in a different way than you might at home, where you're not an insular person. You are a critical part of a team, and you all need to work together. And learning how to, I like to say, making a cocktail, imaginary cocktail of courage and humor and, some other moral muscles, and then drinking that down, in your imagination, and saying, okay, today was really tough, and but I'm gonna go to bed, and I'm gonna think about it, maybe talk about it, and see how we can make some things different. And tomorrow we're gonna do it again, and see if we can be more comfortable. Now, that a lot of the times, that's a special occasion, but on a small scale, that's every day. What was difficult today? Oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to give myself a little bit more time in the morning to work on my feet so that they don't bother me during the day. Or, I need to go to bed 30 minutes earlier. I need to have more hot chocolate. Things like that.
One of the things that really occurs to me is, and you've said it, but I'll repeat it just for good measure, is there's this one side of being way more aware of what's going on with you personally and making sure that you're staying ahead of issues of cold, that sort of thing. And then there's the whole other issue of I'm a part of the team. One of the things you and I talked about before we started recording was you don't call the people that you guide tourists, they're team members. And that has to be a huge part of this.
It is. We really are relying on each other. Our lives are dependent upon each other. And, we're living together for, usually it's at least 10 days, and sometimes it's as long as 40 days, 50 days. And so we are there for each other in times of need, in times of total joy. We are making memories together, and that need to be a group member, a team member, be there for one another. It's something that you learn and develop while you're out there, but going into the expedition knowing that this expedition, you're skiing to the South Pole or doing some incredible Antarctic expedition, and a lot of people think it's about muscles and it's about gritting your teeth and just doing it, but really it's a lot more finesse. And it's a lot of soft skills. Those soft skills are going to make the difference. Yes, gritting your teeth and being able to lean into the wind and put one foot in front of the next. That's absolutely important. But so is getting into the tent and saying to your team member, what a day. What? Can I make you a cup of hot cocoa? Or how, you look like you were doing really great today. I saw you laughing. Tell me what that was about. Or, let's play a game of cards. And so there's a lot of ways that you can contribute to your own experience and to the experience of others and to the success of individual and team goals by using those skills that a lot of times are overlooked when you're talking about a difficult expedition.
I feel like we've done a really good job in terms of preparation, also talking about the expedition itself. So let's just jump to growth for a second, because that was the third thing that you mentioned at the top of this recording. And one of the things that you said that really struck me is you can have growth before, during, and different ways after. Talk a little bit about what that looks like from your perspective and from other team members' perspectives.
Sure. So when you finish an expedition, it's an amazing experience, you don't have to ski another 10 miles. You no longer have to make your own water. You can turn on a faucet to get hot water or even water at all, you know. And you have been thinking as you ski about your family or about your first meal you're going to have when you get at home. There's so much to look forward to. And as you go through that, those can be amazing experiences. And for a lot of people, while they're doing that, there's also something that's sort of surprising. And that might be a lack of a feeling, maybe a lack of a feeling of accomplishment, or everything is so easy all of a sudden. You don't have to work for it. And there's a lot of satisfaction and reward in having to work, to living a simple life, but yet somehow in all of its simplicity, feeling like there's so much more reward and satisfaction every single day. So when you go back into this other world where everything is so easy and it's handed to you, there can be dissatisfaction, or maybe you're not even sure what the emotions are. And that's totally normal and that's totally acceptable. And one of the things that I like to remember is that so much of what a lot of people feel so much of what happened during an expedition can't be brought home. You can't bring home all the team members and all of the jokes and, the stoves. Nobody wants to cook with a MSR stove in their kitchen at night. But the most important things you can bring home, you've been working really hard on yourself, and you've been working really hard on exposing yourself to new situations and how to work with other people, how to take care of yourself, how to take care of other people, how to live simply. You've been working on taking care of those things around you that are important, your equipment, also your clothing, your mentality. All of these things, when you're on an expedition, you're thinking about them in a way that this is really important that I stop and assess my body right now and make sure that tomorrow morning I'm ready to have this day. Or it's really important that you and I figure out how we're going to relate to each other in this tent, because that's going to affect our expedition. And when you get home, there's so much more going on, and yet you often think those things are no longer important. And they are, of course. And so the neat thing about expeditions is that they often teach us to live in a way that if we can remember to take those tools home with us, they can make our home lives so much more profound. But what I also said to you, and I think you're bringing up, is that the expedition, if you go home, and last week I was skiing in Antarctica, it was amazing. I probably haven't even figured out how that whole experiencing is soaking into my soul and what it means to me. And the cool thing about these amazing expeditions and experiences is that they will mean different things to us at different periods in our life. In a few years from now, I might be going through something that I can think back on the expedition and I can say, wow, I learned how to handle this because of that expedition. And then a few years later, I might have another experience in my life and say, I remember so much from that expedition how we did this, and I'm just going to borrow some of those skills and use them now. And another way that I think is so amazing at the end of an expedition, and it doesn't matter how much time has passed since the expedition, is to share your stories of that experience. And whether that's of what you learned, how you managed to accomplish it successfully, or how you dealt with the adversity, even if you didn't accomplish it successfully. And other times it's just sharing with people how special a place is, how important it is to our life on this planet. And these are places that most people will never get a chance to go to. Yet that doesn't mean that they can't appreciate them and value them and also protect them. Because people will generally protect things that they know and admire and love. And so even if we can just impact people by sharing the experiences and letting them by themselves get excited that those places exist on our planet, that can have a ripple effect, which we will never know how it affects them or what they do with it. But we can still be that, that pathway towards those ripples.
One of the things that we agreed to talk about, and I forgot to mention, and this is a perfect time, is talk about preservation and of these spaces. I mean, obviously we're in some crazy times climate-wise. What does preservation look like from your standpoint?
Yeah, right. preservation is really important, and the polar regions, I mean, all places on the planet, but including the places that are cold and in our cryosphere have snow and ice, they're feeling the impacts of global warming more than a lot of other places. I think everywhere is feeling it, right? But they're obviously can be changed hugely because they are so temperature sensitive. A lot of people think that the North Pole, the South Pole, Antarctica, the Arctic, they're so rugged and extreme, and they are absolutely that. But what they also are is extremely delicate, so sensitive. They are really sensitive to even footprints and more, but to the way we live our lives in the mid-latitudes. And I think that, we were just talking about telling your story because that might impact somebody's life, but also sharing your stories about these places. It teaches people that we're all connected, that our lives here in the mid-latitudes have a profound effect on the health and ability of the places way north and south for them to remain as they are, or for them to be able to adapt to the changes that are on their way. Both the North and South Pole don't have indigenous cultures. Of course, there are wonderful cultures in the Arctic and down south as well. But these places still are incredibly important and have long histories. And the mammals, especially at the North Pole and in Antarctica too, around the edges of the continent, they are the inhabitants. And they have incredible histories and stories and purposes on our planet. So I do feel like, our expeditions in and of themselves are very low impact. We are, using a little bit of fuel each day to cook. We're traveling by ski and dog sled, but we are flying there. So that is the big impact, is getting to and from the start and end of our expeditions. It's a really interesting topic, travel, for people who are concerned about the environment, because it is impactful. And we need to think about how we can do that in a way that it's less impactful. Of course, you can offset your carbon footprint, things like this. But another thing that I think is important is bringing your experience back and sharing it with other people who may never get to go there. And it's not so much about, let me show you what I did. It's more about, how can I take my experience and honor the place and its purpose in our planet with other people who I can impact, who can be amazed by their environments and amazed by the fact that they exist on our planet. And then also, how can I encourage people to have a deeper, richer life with the natural world? It might not be that you say, well, you have to go to Antarctica to experience it, but encouraging people to go redevelop a relationship with the park that's just down the street, or the forest that's a couple miles away. Because when we have connections to the natural world, it doesn't necessarily matter where that connection is. It can be just as powerful whether it's in Antarctica or whether it's in our backyard. And it can also make us become the type of person that the planet really needs right now. A person who's going to think about their carbon footprint on a regular basis, where their energy comes from, how they can contribute to keeping our planet a planet for generations that we can still admire and be a positive part of.
You are amazing, and I want to thank you for what you've just shared, because it's just so from the heart. It's just so clear where you live with this stuff. 2 last questions. As a guide, what's the most profound thing about what you get to do?
I get to go to amazing places, but it would be nothing if it was not the people that I was with. So the most amazing thing about my expeditions is really getting to be a part of the team and meeting such incredible people. It really is a gift to meet the amazing people that we journey with. And they're from different countries, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds. We have a real diverse group, and it's such a gift because there are some amazing amazing people. The interesting thing about our expeditions is that, you know, you can imagine we get some people who are type A's, a lot of them, but hearing their stories about their lives, where they've come from, what they've done, how they've created success and enjoyment in their lives, it's just, you know, every person's different, and it's so amazing and really inspiring to meet such a variety of people. So I'd have to say that is it. Also, we don't, you know, I've mentioned that the North and South Pole don't have indigenous cultures, but the areas around them do. And being a part of those cultures, even if on the periphery, and seeing them and seeing how they have for thousands of years lived with their environment and done remarkable things, and just learning about their cultures is pretty incredible too.
Excellent answer. Last question. When you think about the expeditions that you've done, what do you think the most important thing somebody who wants to go on one of these should know, should be thinking?
So I think a really important thing is for them to be sort of looking at it like a blank slate, you know, not like, oh, I'm coming to this with such and such of a background, so I sort of already know the expedition world and yada, yada. A lot of times with our most experienced team members, we have to deconstruct what they've learned on other expeditions and then rebuild it up in a polar context. So I think, you know, I should also say that we have people on our teams that have a ton of experience, and that's wonderful. We also have people on our teams who have, you know, found out that, oh my gosh, I can ski to the North Pole. Are you serious? I'm going to try to figure out if I'm able to do that. And so they're coming at this from a different background. What I love about their backgrounds is that their minds are open to everything. What is the best way to train? How should I do this? What should I be thinking that I might feel like? And every day they wake up and their eyes are wide open and they are ready for a steep learning curve. And they're going to get it. But they're also going to, you know, be absorbing a ton of enthusiasm and passion and new experiences that make their lives rich and deep and all those things. So I think sort of letting go of the ego, that's something we all have to do when we're in a cold environment, because I might be jumping up and down and winding my arms in the air like this just to stay warm, and you might be standing there like it's a day on the, you know, at the equator, and that's okay. But I think you have to let go of your ego when you join an expedition like this. Look at it as a blank slate and say, okay, I'm going to think from the get-go, how can I make the most of this? What can I do now that might allow me to share my story later? Doesn't have to be a movie or a book, but I might want to bring, you know, a journal that's really lightweight so that I can record a few things every day. I might want to write a letter to myself in the beginning of the expedition that I can read at the end of the expedition and see how much I've grown. Or I might want to, you know, bring my family in and let them make me some playlists or some things like that, you know. There are so many ways to do it if you're open to the remarkable experience that it can be.
Annie Aggens, you are the director of Polar Explorers. You can be reached at annie@polarexplorers.com and your website, polarexplorers.com. Thank you so much for being on Antarctic Adventures podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciated this time, and I know that anybody that's watched this or listened to it is going to be so much better informed about what it means to take an Arctic adventure. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Marcus Gill Presents Antarctica Expert Interviews. And be sure to read the video description for more information on how to prepare for your own Antarctica cruise.